Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to everybody on the West Coast. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is AJ Kuftic, and I'm Principal Technologist at Expedient. Today, we have a Q&A with a super great guest, Laura Larimer, who is IT Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools. Real quick housekeeping note, though. If you have any questions, please enter those down here into the Q&A panel. That helps us keep track of the questions and make sure that they get answered. If you ask a question, you're entered to win a prize. That prize today is an Ember warming mug. So winter time's coming around, keep those beverages nice and warm. So if you ask a question, you're entered to win that. And all of this is being recorded. So if you have to step away, you want to show this to somebody else, you'll get a link in your email. This will also be on our website, go.expedient.com/webinar replays, on our YouTube page, youtube.com/expedient, and our Instagram, instagram.com/_expedient. Today with us, we have Laura Larimer. She is IT Officer for Indianapolis Public Schools. We also have Doug Theis, who is our Director of Market Strategy, and myself. I'll be answering, taking care of the question and answer in the Q&A panel, and I'll be back to take your questions to Laura and Doug. So if you have those, get them in as we go. Doug, Laura, the floor is yours.
Thanks, AJ. Laura, let's dive right in.
Okay.
How is IT and education different from what most IT professionals experience?
Great question. And I'm probably uniquely qualified to address that, mostly because I can't seem to keep a job. So I've worked in manufacturing, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in higher ed, I've worked in government. And so I have a perspective around how K-12 education is both similar and extremely different from all of those. So let's talk first, if you don't mind, about what I think is kind of similar. So like government and higher education, K-12 has a very strong value toward autonomy with what you might call its business units, right? So it might be departments in government, or schools of this or that in higher education, or just schools in K-12. So I've got 60 autonomous units in IPS. And so in that way, very much like those industries, and I've been able to leverage some of the things from that previous experience. When it comes to healthcare, I think there's a lot of similarity as well. So for instance, rather than just being nurses and patients, we have teachers and students. I think the point being more that the employees, the staff, are natural nurturers. Sometimes that makes them distrusting of IT. The kind of right brain versus left brain thing. And their customers are in need of that nurturing, right? Whether they be patients or their students, they're in need of that nurturing, though sometimes they're not all that cooperative about getting it. So there's a lot of similarity there as well. And then when it comes to manufacturing, I have found almost none. So manufacturing, when I was working in manufacturing, we drew our value from standards and repeatable process. And I will tell you that the people in education, and particularly in K-12, really believe in that every individual is different and needs something different, that personalization, and that's always going to be a value. So it's really hard to drive those kinds of manufacturing things. But perhaps it's easier if I just talk a little bit about our experience as we reacted to the pandemic, to just give you a sense.
Please.
So when the pandemic first hit, one of the things that immediately dawned on me is that I was going to have to get every single one of my customers a device. I'm going to just pause and let that sink into for everybody. I had to make sure every single one of my customers got a device just to stay in business.
How many devices, Laura?
We have over 30,000 students, and we had about 6,000 devices that we considered appropriate for virtual learning at the time that there was the shutdown. Yeah, a lot. And so then at the same time, not only did we have to give them all devices, but we also had to make sure they had connectivity, right? Because we already knew that lots of our parents, our families, didn't have connectivity outside of just their cell phone. Well, that's not going to support virtual learning. And it certainly isn't going to support virtual learning for a household full of children, because most of our households have more than one.
Mhm.
And then we also had to figure out, how are we going to support this whole new thing? We had a whole new support paradigm. Not only do we have more quantities, but now all of those support calls that used to go to somebody at the school, an intermediary at the school, who then would contact IT, that didn't exist anymore. We had to make those support contacts happen directly between IT and our end customer. Oh, and then of course we still had to keep the wheels on and deal with the doubling of those support calls. So it was challenging. I can talk a little about how we did it. And I would say that in how we did it, it's really not any different. So we started with, how is the IT experience different in K-12? But I think we all kind of did a lot of the same things. So first, all the leaders in the organization, the top level leaders, had the very same epiphany I did. If we're going to stay in business, we're going to have to get devices to every single one of our students, every single one of our customers. That had to be done. But that top level leadership was critical. Second thing, leaders from other departments came together. Finance leaders and strategic leaders came together to handle things like, how do we get funding? And what's the logistics for getting those devices out? We had staff who volunteered to come help prepare things, because they weren't necessarily teaching in classrooms anymore because we were closed down for the spring break. So they came and volunteered time on their spring break in order to get that done. We planned. And then when COVID wrecked our plans, we had plans to actually do a drive-up distribution, right? We're going to have people drive in, we would have masks and social distance, and we'd hand them their device, and they would all be able to drive away. And we had that all planned out. And then it spiked. And so we replanned, and we pivoted to doing mailing. And we mailed all those devices. Now, understand that first wave was really only 6,000. It was the ones we had. And we focused on our kids that were in credit-bearing classes, because that's critical to graduation. So, that was our priority, right? And we didn't, and so then our academics and other departments were doing things like making videos and working with our television channels in order to broadcast those for our younger kids. Sending home learning in paper-based form, because we weren't ready to do it for 30,000 students. But then we got to those kinds of things later, and we were ready for 30,000 students when we did back to school for this school year. But that distribution we were able to do in person because we were open again by then. So the reason I said, we all kind of do the same thing to get through a crisis, right? We lead, we team, we plan, we flex. It's all the same. We prioritize. all of those very same things came to bear, whether, I mean, across the whole IT community, every industry out there did those things.
Yeah.
Maybe just in different ways.
Well, kudos to you and your team for pivoting multiple times to get this work done and to get the huge task of devices to all the students. What kind of ongoing issues? I mean, is your work done now that the devices are at home?
Is our work ever done? I don't think so. Of course, there are ongoing issues. I mean, one of the things that is, my customers are a little harder on devices than most customers. And it's not, because they're kids.
Right.
They're kids. It's not because they're naughty kids. It's because they're kids. They wrestle with their brothers and sisters. They hop over the back of the sofa without regard to the fact that the iPad is sitting there on the cushion when they want to watch television. Screens get cracked. Devices get lost. Devices get stolen. They get left in hot cars by kids and by parents. Those things, because they're all very new, we work very hard to teach those lessons of responsibility. But our students don't just come to us with that knowledge of how to take care of a device and how to make sure it's okay. And so we continue to have to make sure that we are supporting them every day and dealing with those kinds of losses, and that we've got enough inventory to be able to replace those things when we do have those kinds of losses. Here's another one for you. We started in person this year, right? We started in August in person, and then very recently we pivoted back to being virtual again. When we pivoted back to, now bear in mind, we had MiFis that were out in the spring when we were virtual with all our credit-bearing kids. We offered MiFis to anybody who wanted them so that their kids could actually do virtual work from home, even if their students were in class, even if they were physically in class. And still, when we pivoted back virtually, we had a demand for 300 more MiFi devices in order to give the right level of support for that virtual learning for connectivity into the homes. So, those kinds of, here's another one, professional development. Our teachers, this is the first time they've had to do this. And it's not just a matter of, how do you run teams or how do you use Schoology, right? It's a whole matter of, now that you can't walk around the classroom, now that you can't go, write things on a board, how do you teach differently given your new environment? So that teacher professional development is huge. And then also, this is a really tough time for all of us. This is rough, right? And so professional development on how to help kids who are feeling that stress. All those problems continue.
What do you think the invisible effects on the kids are, Laura?
Wow. So many of our kids are just struggling with the virtual learning. Just think about this. It's hard for me to go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, an hour, 4 hours of screen time, and I finally get to decide when I'm going to take a break. Imagine you're 8.
Yeah.
And that's what life is like for you. Or you're 16. It's harder. You right now I can raise my hand. I can virtually raise my hand, but it's different. It's such a change. And so I know a lot of our kids are struggling in order to adapt to that new environment. And then when you add on that, the increasing amount of economic insecurity. Kids across the nation have parents who are losing jobs, losing income. Sometimes for the first time in their lives, they're wondering how they're going to make the rent, how they're going to keep gas in the car so they can make it to work if they have jobs. Those kinds of insecurities are really defining on kids, and kids need help to move through those things. And so it's not all about what we used to call reading, writing, and arithmetic. It's also about the social and emotional part of going through this. And so, as I said, our teachers need the professional development about how to help those kids, and the kids need that help. And I think I'll just stop there.
What about impacts on school district and IT?
Well, so I guess I would say from the school district and IT perspective, I think about the staff and just the people element. We are all social beings, right? We are all social beings. We are now social beings in a time of stress. Now, how do we deal with stress? I mean, as human beings deal with stress by being social. They hug, they shake hands, they joke, they laugh, they smile, they have recess, they exercise. I don't care whether you're a child or an adult, you do all of those kinds of things. And for us as social beings, so many of those things have been taken away under this pandemic. So I think that's a big impact. I would also say on the more, day-to-day, what's happening, sometimes we're in the buildings and sometimes we're not in the buildings. So there's that constant sense of change, right? Of how are we going to be doing our jobs? Change is difficult. And so with a constant sense of change, that's going to be difficult. With IT, we've had to really staff up on process. Oh, here's one of the things from an IT perspective. We got a lot better at taking that page from the playbook of manufacturing. We standardized. We standardized on iPads for our pre-K through second graders. We standardized on Chromebooks for our 3rd through 12th graders. We standardized on a single web conferencing software. We didn't start with those things, by the way. We didn't start with a single web conferencing software. In the spring, we were supporting 3 pieces of web conferencing software. Unsustainable, and we recognized it pretty immediately. So by the time we got to this time, to this school year, we had done standards for being able, using software to teach with. Our curriculum department selected standards for certain pieces of software in order to meet certain learning objectives. And we had to have a lot of involvement with our schools in order to be part of that support mechanism out to our students. And that's something that we had never done before. So it's been, I think, really good in terms of strengthening that partnership between the academic side, if you will, and the IT side. So it's that IT business alignment that we all talk about all the time.
I've got one more question for you before we open it up to the group. I've heard you speak recently about funding for the original devices you were able to find, but funding for ongoing breaks and the changes that are naturally going to happen with these kids. How can our listeners help you make a difference with these kids?
Thanks. I'm going to tell you how to help with those kinds of things, but let me tell you a few others as well, if I can
Okay.
just start with some other things. I think, first of all, I'd like to encourage everybody to be informed about what's going on with IPS. There is on the IPS website, myips.org, click on, let me see, what's the name of it? State of the District. Scroll down and watch that video. Our superintendent talks about so many things that have to do with meeting our customers where they are, that have to do with all of the things that IPS has done during this time in order to help our students. I've just grazed the surface. And she's really passionate about those things. So I would hope that you could get informed about all of the things that IPS has done. Second, give your time and resources to those kinds of organizations that really do help deal with this economic insecurity. I will call out Gleaners Food Bank. They are a partner in the meal program with IPS. And so anything you can do with them, whether it's your time, whether it's your money, whether it's food goods, whatever, heartily welcome. And then finally, we would really appreciate any donations to the IPS Equity Fund. And you can see more about what the Education Equity Fund does by going to ipsfund.org. And then there is a link at the top of that page for the IPS Equity Fund, and you can just click on that link and find out exactly what they do, what those funds are allocated for. One of those things is for e-learning. Another is for this social and emotional help that our parents or that our students and families are maybe in need of. But you can read more there. And if you are so inclined, there's a donate button at the top of that page, and we would appreciate all donations that help us to continue with the e-learning and with the support that those kids need. Here's another one I want to give you as well. When we are done with all of this and back to whatever that normal is going to be, I hope you'll get involved with the oh my goodness. I have lost the name of the organization in my, here we go, Tech Point Foundation for Youth. Yeah. It just went out of my brain. Their robotics and STEM programs are really excellent. They work with not just IPS, but other schools. And they really are cultivating your workforce of the future. So when those kinds of activities come back up, please think about your time and energies in that direction as well.
Thanks, Laura. AJ,
yes.
Questions?
So many really great questions. I want to thank everybody for getting these questions in. You actually covered a bunch of them. In fact, that last question that Doug asked about funding sources and where funding for these sorts of things came from. Again, please go donate to the IPS Fund. You may also want to look in your local area, especially because we have a lot of people who are on from maybe not from outside the Indianapolis area. Please look in your area, donate to your local schools, local food banks, and support as you can to provide these sorts of educational opportunities to everyone. We do want to make sure that we support Laura as well. So ipsfund.org. There's a lot of technical questions, Laura. Everybody wants to know how you guys really did this. But I think there's a couple in here that I think are kind of important. What's been the impact on attendance and grades and how teachers have to deal with what is in essence a lot of distraction capabilities because kids aren't in a classroom, they have a screen in front of them, right? They can pull up YouTube right. just as easily as they can pull up Zoom. So how are teachers handling those sorts of things?
Yep. Okay, so not a teacher, so I'm not sure I can tell you how teachers are handling them. What I can tell you is that I know that those are all the kinds of things I was talking about in regard to students having a really hard time. And they're not in the classroom. There are pieces of software that some of our schools are using. So I can tell you about some of the tools we're trying to bring forth in order to help with that. And there are tools out there that are made strictly for education that actually let the teacher see what's going on the desktop of that student. And then if the student is off looking at that at that YouTube, and when they ought to be paying attention to their Schoology lesson, the teacher can privately message that student and say, you need to be doing this other thing that you're supposed to be doing. So that's one way in which there are technology tools that help to support that objective in virtual learning.
There were a number of questions, and you mentioned the MyFis and getting those out to students. And you mentioned that there was another burst kind of as you guys went back to virtual. Is that a program through Verizon and AT&T? How are you able to provide this sort of connectivity to maybe students who don't have that at home?
Great question. And I want to do a shout out to the city of Indianapolis and some partners that they brought to the table in order to help all of the school districts within Marion County to come together and find a single source. So, we pooled our buying power, if you will, did an RFP, and got really, really good pricing. T-Mobile ended up being our vendor for that. And we have continued to work with T-Mobile throughout this process.
Laura, there's a few more questions. Can we go a little bit longer? Can you go a little longer?
My schedule is open at least for another half hour. So please feel free.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura, for your time.
You bet.
I've seen a number of questions here around budgeting. So obviously there was the switch in budgeting and funding to meet the needs of this year's school district. Obviously, I think most school districts I'm aware of, and I'm sure you guys are the same, as the July 1st to June 30th sort of budget calendar. Has there been any push or change in budget allocations for next year that you're working on in terms of being able to support this maybe long term? Obviously, I think we're all expecting a lot of this virtual hybrid sort of learning situation to go further than just January. So how does that play into budgeting and budget allocations going forward?
Yeah, really good question. So our fiscal year does go from July 1 through June 30. I think another piece of information that is relevant to my answer to your question is that IT has just been, the reporting line for IT has been changed within IPS very recently. And so IT used to report to operations, and now we report to strategy. And so as a part of that new reporting, another part of that is that we are starting to look at what is the long-term change in our IT vision mission? What is the strategy moving forward? And then what are those economic or funding supports, as well as human resource supports, that we're going to need in order to continue on into the future? And it's not just a matter of IT doing that planning. This is an organization-wide effort because our superintendent has said this will continue, not just because of COVID, because the e-learning is central and critical, and it will stay as a part of our environment. And we need to make sure that we understand what that looks like and what the expectations are moving into the future, both expectations of IT and the expectations that the customers should be able to count on from IT.
Just real quick, Brenda Bell in the chat, very thankful to Brenda for adding in donorschoose.org. That's another area where you can go to and you can donate and get even a little bit more granular to donate to specific classrooms even. So thank you to that. I'm putting that into the main chat panel there. So as you go forward, do you see, this is a question from me actually, do you see this sort of changing in allowing hybrid or virtual models to go forward? Are you guys ending snow days? That I actually had this thought the other day of, now that you have this hybrid model, you're in Indianapolis, I'm in Pittsburgh, we're in the north, snow happens.
Yep.
Does this change the way the district handles delays and weather issues and, any of those sorts of things going forward?
And of course, that's going to be a decision that will be made by the Indianapolis Public School Board, and I would not dream of speaking for them. However, it certainly is an opportunity that I suspect we will be looking to leverage. The idea of being able to keep learning going, no matter what the circumstances are, whether those disruptions are weather related or virus related, I think we now have a significant amount of understanding and capacity district-wide that we would be able to use that same thing, leverage those same things in order to do exactly what you said, stop having snow days.
I don't want to end snow days. It was one of my favorite things as a kid. But I'm just looking at this going like, there may not be a reason to do it anymore. I see a bunch of questions in here about device choices. And you mentioned earlier that standardizing was really important to having a successful support of those things. But are those decisions being made for just the current model, or is that going to be the model going forward?
I would say it's probably going to be going forward for a while. We will revisit based upon data when we are looking at our strategy. But we just made these decisions, and I would anticipate that they would go forward for at least the life of the devices that we just bought, which is at least 3 to 5 years.
I mean, that's fantastic, because I know that I used to work in educational IT. Hello, General McLean School District, miss you. I worked for my school district when I was a teen in college, and getting devices into the hands of anyone was hard.
Yes.
But I can imagine now that you're standardizing on those sorts of things, the district has to get their value out of it. They don't have free money to hand out for laptops every 2 years. So obviously the IPS fund, do you guys work on grants for technology things as well?
So far, I have not worked on grants for technology things. We were, of course, recipients of federal grants, the CARES Act money that came in. So we got some substantial CARES Act money that was used in order to purchase a number of those MiFi devices and other devices, the laptops and the iPads. But that was not really grant work. So no, in my department, we have not done that kind of grant work.
Okay.
But IPS definitely does. I mean, one of the things I'll talk about is we've had wonderful partnerships with Salesforce and Lilly and other organizations within, corporate organizations within our community who've come forth in order to help provide grants for certain kinds of educational objectives that might involve either technology or STEM from the education perspective. So I was really just talking about in regard to IT and the very essence of IT, where we in my department are not involved in that looking for grants in order to fund our operations.
Got it.
And more?
I do want to really quickly announce the winner of the prize. The prize goes to Bradford Roche. So congratulations to Bradford. Bradford, Karen will be reaching out to you to get in contact for the prize. I do want to put one last question out here. I'm trying to make sure that we get a good one. When it comes to student use, and particularly when we talk about use of when we talk about the use of these devices, they go into homes, right? How are you handling, or do you guys even really give any care or thought to additional usage inside of the home, right? This is a Chromebook that is being given to a child to do their schoolwork, but if mom or dad or older brother, older sister use it for job search purposes or any other purposes, does the district care, or is that something that you guys kind of try to lock down outside of school hours?
Really good questions. So of course, we're going to encourage anything that helps the stability of that family. And if being able to use that after school hours in order to do a job search, that's absolutely fine. However, one of the things that we are charged with doing is making sure that we filter anything that could be inappropriate for our students. And sometimes that will lock down things that might be helpful to adults, though I don't think a job site would be one of those things, and I'm not sure I can come up with an example, but we do lock things down. We are not locking them down for the purpose of prohibiting other uses of those devices. We are locking them down for the purpose of making sure that our kids always have a safe and secure environment within which to learn. I will talk a little bit about where we do lock things down. So, we put MiFis out into the homes. But I'm going to tell you that a MiFi where somebody else in the household happens to be doing work using another computer and attaching to that MiFi is going to degrade the lesson and the streaming ability. So we just can't let somebody come on and stream their music or play a game or whatever else. So we do lock the MiFis down so that we maintain the integrity of that of the connectivity and the ability to learn across the wires.
Super cool. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We love the heart you have for your children and for all the students at IPS. And the fact that you're dealing with the emotional issues in the school district is, along with the technology issues. We really appreciate you shining a light on this. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. I truly appreciate it. Thank
you, Laura. By the way, everyone, you can join us tomorrow. We don't even have to wait till next week. You can join us tomorrow. We're going to be talking about A Very Cloudy Christmas Carol. So please join us for that. That's our last webinar of the year. So that's 12:30 tomorrow, not Thursday. Again, thank you to all of you who have attended. We really appreciate all of your time. Laura, we appreciate your time. Donate to ipsfund.org or go to donorschoose.org to donate to your local classroom and help support education across this fine country. With that, thanks.
Thank you.